Hey, it's Jacob. I'm not a real rock star, but I might loosely be based on the author, who's also not a rock star. Hey, I just wanted to take a couple of minutes and tell you about Anchor. If you haven't heard about it, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First off, it's free. Also, there's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast, like right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast so it can be heard on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership, and it's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm right now to get started.
Hey guys, just wanted to come on and give a disclaimer before this episode. If you've been listening to previous episodes, then you know that A Desperate Soul, while it is a clean podcast, in other words, it contains no foul language, it does deal with some pretty heavy-duty subject matter: death, disease, drug use, and so forth, not to mention demonic possession. This episode, however, deals with suicide. So I just wanted to say that listener discretion is strongly advised for this episode. And thank you very much.
By the Fire presents A Desperate Soul by Dave Smale. Read for you by the author. Chapter 8. The giant monstrosities were inescapable. Every car had one. People walking on the street had them. When Jacob got off the boulevard into his neighborhood, guttural growls and monstrous laughter came from inside houses and apartment buildings. They bellowed phrases, often commands, in English which sounded eerily human. Once or twice, Jacob thought he'd heard the things speak Spanish. It was hard to tell. There were so many of them. Jacob became increasingly convinced he was dreaming. Though, if he was, it was the longest, most vivid one he'd ever experienced. He reasoned that the dream would end once he got to his late grandmother's house. Tilda's house surely represented something of an end to the insanity. No monsters had attacked him during his frantic sprint down the boulevard. But he wasn't taking any chances. He ducked behind trees or power boxes when cars passed by. After more than 3 hours of jogging and hiding and sprinting, he arrived home. Only then did he realize he lacked the means to get inside. Thankfully, the neighbors' cars were in their driveway. He vaguely remembered Tilda entrusting them with a spare house key some years back. Jacob knocked on Reggie and Monica's front door. Monica answered. She was monster-free, which was a relief. He noticed, however, that she was wearing some sort of strange sheer garment over her clothes and a matching headdress. This was a strange dream indeed. Jacob doubled over, panting. Monica eyed him indignantly, her expression saying, "Look what the cat dragged in." "The key," Jacob said between breaths. "Huh? What key?" Monica said, her face twisting. Realizing he'd skipped all formalities, Jacob held up an index finger to stall and catch his breath. "Sorry, I just came from the hospital. She's..." Jacob stopped. He couldn't bring himself to use the word dead. "She's gone," he finished. Monica's gaze dropped, eyes moistening. "I'm so sorry," she said after a few moments. "I'll get you the house key." Monica disappeared into her house to fetch the key. Jacob used the time to further catch his breath. She returned, handing him the spare key. A few minutes later, Jacob and his belongings were finally back inside his grandmother's house. He deposited the guitar, amp, and backpack in his old room, which was in the exact state as he'd left it months before, except with a fresh coat of dust. The house had a stillness to it, a noticeable, tangible sense of peace. Jacob didn't know if it was due to its being unoccupied for so long, but he was grateful for it. He heard a monster or two somewhere in the distance, barely, as if the house provided a natural sound barrier against their awful voices. He peered out the front window, saw no behemoths, and breathed a sigh of relief. And now, he thought, this stupid dream can end. He waited, but the dream didn't end. He walked to his room, sat down on his bed. Still no end. He stared at the walls for a long while, trying to figure out what may cause the dream to cease. Maybe I'll wake up in reality if I go to sleep in my dream, he wondered. It was worth a shot. Jacob laid on his bed. The smell of dusty, unwashed sheets invaded his nostrils, and he sneezed. He pulled back the top sheet, kicked off his shoes, and tried to relax. The roller coaster of events of the day replayed in his mind as he closed his eyes. Waking up under a toilet. Again. Subsequently being kicked out of Bean's apartment ferociously. What a day. In fact, what an ordeal the last 3 months had been. Playing in concerts for hundreds, sometimes thousands of screaming fans, and relentless partying. It had all been fun. But dealing with Bean's madness had been too high a price to pay. Then finding out that he'd gotten a girl pregnant. What was her name again? Shayna. A part of him didn't want her to be a dream. Oddly, he felt that he'd like to find her again, apologize, maybe see if they could work things out. It would be for the sake of the baby, of course. That is, if he could convince her not to abort, and if she wasn't a figment of his imagination. And then, learning of his grandmother's fatal illness. He hadn't even known she was sick. After finding out she was dying, he went to the hospital only to watch his cancer-stricken, emaciated grandmother die before his eyes. She'd touched him and prayed that strange prayer. Her words haunted him. Lord, open his eyes that he might see. Chills ran down his spine as he recalled it. Last, but certainly not least, the monsters. Their towering stature, their evil auras, and that disgusting guttural language they spoke. Jacob shuddered just thinking about it. This had to be a dream, he decided. No one has this bad of a day. Right? An hour and 40 minutes of restless tossing and turning later, Jacob rolled out of bed and finally admitted to himself, "This is not a dream." He mulled around Tilda's house, reliving unwelcomed memories. Every nook and cranny had an event tied to it. The rocking chair in the living room that he'd spent many a night curled up on her lap, crying as he asked her again and again why his parents had to die. She'd held him close, comforting and praying for him. How many nights had she rocked him to sleep in that chair? Yet, despite the continual outpouring of Tilda's seemingly endless supply of love through their mutual suffering, Jacob had somehow never received the needed consolation to bring closure. There was the coffee table, at which he'd knelt, coloring pictures as he tried to forget his parents. He could never shake their memory, even now. The multiple pictures Tilda had hung in the hallway of him and his parents didn't help matters. Some of them were taken only a couple weeks before the accident. His stomach growled, prompting him to search for anything edible. It was obvious his grandmother had not been home in months. Everything in the fridge had spoiled. Jacob spent several minutes dumping out curdled milk and tossing moldy cheese. The bread and vegetables may have qualified as science experiments. In the pantry, he found a packet of ramen noodles. Score, he thought. He filled a pot with water and placed it on the stove. While he waited for the water to boil, he checked his social media feeds. Surely, others would be reporting monster sightings. Perhaps someone had an explanation as to what the things were. Jacob scrolled through the posts of other users he followed, along with news feeds to which he subscribed, but he found nothing pertaining to monster sightings. However, he found something he wished he hadn't. Jacob had social media accounts with profiles on two of the most popular sites, Dumbdown and Estupido. His profile handle on each was @darkjake_96, in keeping with his gothic style. He favored Dumbdown, with its 140 maximum character posts, colloquially called dumbs. Jacob posted dumbs frequently, usually pertaining to nonsense. Unfortunately, so did his former bandleader/supervisor/landlord, Bean. Scrolling through the latest postings, he discovered that Bean had commenced a public Jacob trashing campaign. His jaw dropped as he read Bean's dumb, which was his version of an announcement of Jacob's departure from smoke rings. From Bean the Smoke Ring King @Oscar the Bean. Sorry, Smoke Ring fans, for canceling tonight's show. Had to fire my piece of crap, guitar player. Pay your rent next time, @darkjake_96. You little pansy. Bean followed up the dumb with several more, mentioning that he'd replaced Jacob with not one, but two new guitar players. Furthermore, all future shows were still on the calendar. He finished with a series of 7 more dumbs, each using a barrage of colorful metaphors to cement just how low a life form Jacob was. Several comments replying to Bean's dumb were from partygoers who were present when the incident took place that morning. Each backed up Bean's narrative and confirmed Jacob to be scum. It didn't surprise him. He expected nothing less from the pack of freeloaders. To Jacob's dismay, not one person stood up on his behalf. No one said they were sorry to see him go, or even that he was a decent guitar player. Even Benz, whom Jacob had considered his closest friend, claimed he'd never liked him and was happy to replace him in the band. At that point, Jacob set the phone down, feeling lower than ever. No longer hungry, Jacob turned off the stove and went back to bed. Having neither relatives nor friends, nor a job or money, Jacob contemplated ending it all for the first time in his young life. Lying down and shutting his eyes, he sought desperately for a reason to keep on living. Not only was he officially out of the band for which he'd written nearly all the music, but without even trying, he'd also managed to burn bridges with everyone he knew. What was more was that he'd gotten a girl pregnant who wanted nothing to do with him, whether she kept the baby or not. He'd likely never know if she decided to abort. If she decided to keep the baby, he'd also probably never be informed, which meant that another man would likely step in and take his place as father to his child. Jacob didn't have the slightest inkling of how to become a family man. He'd never even thought about it. After all, he was only 18. But now that the possibility was there, he found that it was not so easy to dismiss. The thought of being an absentee father was disturbing, and the thought of losing a child before it even had the opportunity to live set him on the edge of utter panic. As if that wasn't enough, new and more depressing thoughts bombarded his mind. They seemed to come from out of nowhere. "I've been a burden to my grandma, and now she's dead," he thought. "She was so nice. How could I have ever treated her so badly? What kind of despicable person am I? If my parents and little sister had lived, would I also have been a burden to them? Would I have been a horrible big brother? Probably. In that case, is there a reason to keep on living? No." If this was the logical conclusion to which he was coming, he figured he might as well follow it to its end. No family, no friends, no band, no job. Is there anything to live for? He asked himself. No, he answered. Anyone to live for? No. That settles it then. Jacob's self-conversation shifted from finding reasons to live to figuring out the quickest way to end it all. Overdose? Maybe, but I'd have to buy a lot of something powerful. All Grandma has is Tylenol. I'm pretty sure that won't do the trick. I need a way that doesn't require leaving the house. Drowning? I could try filling the bathtub, but I'd have to force myself to stay under the water. Nah. Cutting? That might work. Cutting while in the bathtub? Now, that would... He dozed off before he knew it. Jacob dreamt of all the events of the past 12 hours. Everything happened in a scrambled, random order. He was at the hospital to witness Tilda's death before Bean kicked him out. Then Shayna was peeling out of the Wawa parking lot. At that point in the dream, he decided to take his own life. He walked back inside the Wawa and somehow ended up in his grandmother's bathroom. A telltale sign of a dream, though it didn't occur to him. Another thing that didn't occur to him was what was missing from the dream. There were no monsters anywhere. Jacob lay in the nearly full bathtub, though he hadn't turned on the faucet, nor disrobed or stepped into the bathtub for that matter. He looked down and conveniently saw a knife in his hand, which he didn't recall having before. No matter, he pressed the knife to one wrist, then the other, slicing himself open. Naturally, he felt nothing. He watched as blood mixed with water for several seconds. Jacob settled in for the eternal rest that was sure to come. But then, something grabbed him, something invisible, but terrifyingly powerful. It constricted his chest like an anaconda. When he was sure he couldn't breathe, the force, or whatever it was, pulled him down. Not just under the water, but downwards in general. Jacob was somehow pulled through the bathtub and into the floor. He saw wood beams, insulation pipes, electrical wires, concrete, and then dirt. He kept descending through solid materials as if falling through water, tree roots, rocks, worms, grubs. Down, down, down he was pulled, faster with each second, and too powerless to resist. After thousands of feet of dirt, he was pulled through miles of magma and white-hot molten mantle. Yet he felt no heat. At last, he was pulled into an open place, a cavern of absolute pitch darkness. And then he heard them. Nauseating grunts, sickening laughter. Millions of them. Maybe hundreds of millions. The monsters. You've been listening to By the Fire. Hey, tell us what you think. Leave us a review on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you download your podcasts. Or send me an email. info@davesmale.com. info@davesmale.com. Thank you so much for listening. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental.